you both run the Cyber Helpline, which is a charity that provides free help and advice for victims of cybercrime, which is obviously a huge issue always, basically. But what actually sparked your decision to set up this charity?
I think we realised that not enough was being done to support victims of cybercrime. So Mark and I were working together building a cybersecurity consultancy.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing about that organization that we worked in was that they had a private client office or a private office. So we would help ultra high net worth individuals, so super wealthy families, sports stars, all that kind of stuff. And they would have the same cybersecurity problems that other people had.
Yeah.
And they would come to us and we would help them recover from breaches, and then we'd try and help them put security in place. And what we realized then was that it's actually really different trying to help an individual and a family than it is trying to help a bank or a retailer in their cybersecurity. And as we were kind of helping these individuals and families, we were getting so many requests from the general public for help. And we were kind of a bit confused at that point because, you know, we were like, we'll just go to the police and, you know, everything will be okay. Because we were charging lots of money to do what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we kind of had our eyes opened at that point to actually, there's a massive gap in support for victims. They're not getting the help they need. The cybersecurity community doesn't really understand things like cyberstalking and revenge porn and those kind of human issues, but they have the technical expertise to understand the technical side.
Yeah.
And so at that point, we realized that gap is too big, and the only people who can really step in and fill it are the cybersecurity experts.
Yeah.
And so at that point, we set up the Cyber Helpline and started trying to work out how we could help everyone in the UK who needed it for free, essentially.
Yeah. And is there a certain trend that you see more than others when it comes to like the cases you're dealing with?
It's interesting because Mark, you know, when we started, it was all these really human issues. You know, when we were doing it on a kind of paid basis, it was very much divorces and you know, or it was either cybercrime of people frauding their private offices out of lots of money, or hacking and ransoms, lots of stuff we see today.
We saw a lot of spear phishing, wasn't it? So there was spear phishing where obviously these individuals had a high profile. So because they had a high profile, they were a wanted target. And that's where we came from. So I originally came from a corporate background looking after corporate security. Then suddenly Rory pulled me into this organization and we worked together to help people. And it's a completely new learning curve. And then again, with the Cyber Helpline, that's even been more of a learning curve, because then you're looking at people almost domestic rather than, I mean, most of the high wealth individuals have like a small company that looks after them. And we were finding that their processes weren't right. Whereas obviously when you're a little person when you're a small family, that's a very different situation. You haven't got any support. You haven't got the funds or anything to be able to help you out.
Yeah, and I think totally right. And I think the trends that we have seen over the last year or two, you know, in particular around lockdowns. So our caseload in the Cyber Helpline grew something like 362% in the 12 months following the first lockdown compared to the 12 months before.
Yeah.
So you just see this massive spike in people being online, in a lot of offline harassment and other things that would have happened offline moving online. You see all the usual, you know, buy these excellent COVID masks and liters of hand gel and it's all a fake scam, all those kind of normal things we're used to. But I think the summary I would have, you know, we're seeing probably 600 to 700 cases a month now.
Wow.
And so we've helped, you know, almost 10,000 people since we started. And a really good summary is that it is malicious people using generic IT to target people. So we're not seeing anything super smart technically, really. It's really rare. We're seeing people hack Gmail accounts, or use Messenger and Zoom to carry out sextortion attacks, that kind of thing. But what we do see is that move towards much more human issues. So these are cyber crimes, but they're not fully technical. They're human issues like revenge, like someone finding out something about someone and threatening to share it if they don't get some money. And so we're really seeing those human issues targeting things like content for ransom, revenge porn. And so those become really interesting challenges, because there's a technical side to dealing with those cases in terms of technically what's possible, how might they have got that content. But actually the big challenge is the human side. How do you help that individual? Because we often think too much about the financial impact of cybercrime and not enough about the mental health, the online confidence, the personal safety sides, and the impacts of these type of crime.
Do you feel like that is becoming more thought about? Obviously there's so many like campaigns and hopefully laws that are going into kind of like cyber bullying and things like that. So do you feel like it's creating more of a, like, more talk about it, that eventually something will get done by the government?
Yeah, I think we're at a point where it has to start happening.
Yeah.
My view is it isn't. I think we are, we're still getting to grips with this kind of global tool that spans legal jurisdictions.
Yeah.
We're still getting to grips with what's good and what's bad. And the children's code that came out recently from the Information Commissioner's Office, that those kind of guides of how should you build tools for children and keep them safe, those things we need to keep pushing and developing, just so we understand at the level of how do we build these things that we're providing out, how do we avoid them being used maliciously as much as possible. But the real challenge is the engagement point. So you get hacked, or somebody tricks you into sending them lots of money, or someone's got a photograph of you naked and they're just about to share it. What do you really need? You need a really quick response from someone who knows what they're talking about. And you kind of rock up to the police station, and they just don't have the training and resources to deal with that. And so if you kind of make a statement to Action Fraud where you report cybercrime and fraud in the UK, you might hear in 30 days. And so the infrastructure that we have doesn't fit the speed that's needed to deal with these issues, but it also doesn't take into account people who are in domestic abuse situations, who are being cyber stalked, and they've got this fear of technology, it's being used against them, their locations being tracked. Those are issues that have a lot of risk for the individual, but also they have all of this interwoven technology, the email accounts, the iCloud, the Find My Phone app, all these things have been shared in the past with a malicious partner. You need to have that technical understanding of what's happening, but also when to make changes. Yeah. And so to answer your question, I think that we are thinking more about mental health. We're thinking more about how we kind of protect people online, but the actual rubber hasn't hit the road in terms of making it happen.
Yeah,
definitely. I think the legislation and regulations are evolving, but it's like a sort of like a very slow beast, and IT is evolving every day. So are the cyber criminals. They're evolving every second. So for legislation and regulation that takes 2-3 years to get signed off, by the time it does get signed off, things have evolved, the threat landscape has changed, and what's affecting people is changing. It's getting there, it's getting better. There's no two ways about it, but it's still a slow moving beast, and it sometimes can be quite frustrating. But it's also the fact that statistically, the amount of cybercrime that's happening is more than any sort of physical crime. But the police still are having bobbies on the beat because that's what they are seen to be doing, rather than looking at what we should be doing and maybe thinking about having cybercrime units. They did spin some up, but it seems there is nothing there to help the people with quick response other than the cyber helpline.
Yeah. And do you think there are other ways to prevent it? Like, I imagine that if it was taught or spoken about more in schools or different avenues like that, it would maybe prevent it before happening. So then it wouldn't be so hard to overcome once it's happened.
Absolutely. I think training and a knowledgeable person is always the best defense. If we could implant, but it's all ages as well, let's be honest. So my mother still has problems turning a computer on, and some generations are very scared of technology. But it's really important to be able to explain and communicate the do's and don'ts, and be able to put it into different languages. If we had a big loud hailer or a way of just rolling out an implant to everyone in the UK, don't fall for these, it's a scam, that would be brilliant. But I don't think there is the one-hit wonder because of it's so many different age groups. It's the younger generations are getting trained on passwords. I know my children at school were trained on using the right passwords, but I think that teachers would have a problem with discussing cyber stalking and those sort of elements of cyber and cyberbullying within the classroom environment. So I think it is important to get those subjects out there.
Yeah.
I think you've got to be really careful too, because if you go too far to say it's the personal responsibility of the individuals, you get into this victim shaming mentality. Well, you should have had a better password, and we don't say that about any other type of crime. You shouldn't have been in the park late at night. And so I think that there's an immaturity. So if you look at the National Cybersecurity Strategy, which actually kind of finishes this year, there's an 88-page document all about how we're going to protect the UK, how we're going to protect UK government, and how we're going to tackle cybercrime as a nation, basically. In the 88 pages, there is one section that talks about individuals, and it says people must take personal responsibility for their own security. And so the big challenge here is that if that's the strategy, how do people follow that strategy and invest in protecting people? It's just not the strategy. And so I think that education is definitely a part, because that's just a critical part of the response, because people are always going to get through. But we also have to think about, how do we make sure the technologies and devices and online services are legally required to be secure by default. And so, this model is used all the time, but you can't sell a car until it's been tested to a whole bunch of security standards. But you can release a social media platform that's had no security testing at all. And so I think what will have to change, is what we allow in terms of production environments, so people actually using these services, and how users have to be protected. I think we will have to see a difference in regulation and law, and we'll just have to see better international cooperation. There's just no other way around it. And I think that cooperation has to start with really simple things, like if somebody is targeted on a social media platform that's based in the US, if the police go to that social media platform, they should have to release the details about that crime to the police. And so really simple things that would help lower the kind of bar of people getting help, basically. So it's a really good question, but there's so much to the answer of how you kind of solve that problem, that I think that's unfortunately, I think we'll see really high rates of cybercrime and victims having a big impact in this area for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and obviously that's going to kind of weigh heavy on the charity, I imagine. So what are the biggest, other than that, what are the biggest struggles of running a not-for-profit charity that you found?
Oh, my favorite topic. Okay, I could talk about, you're going to have to stop me after about 4 hours, because It's really interesting because we are a bunch of people from the cybersecurity industry who have largely always been in the private sector and had this kind of spotted this massive problem and thought, right, we need to set up a kind of not-for-profit charity that allows us to solve problems in this area. And it's actually just really hard, really, really hard, because everyone agrees it's a great idea, it's a massive problem, and we need to fix it. But the big challenge early on was, okay, we have technical experts like Mark who understand, could walk into any global organization and help them with their cybersecurity program.
Yeah.
But if you asked Mark 4 years ago, what's the best practice in dealing with revenge porn? He would have looked at you with, would have had a guess, but had no idea. Same with cyber stalking, same with online harassment, all of these issues that just don't exist in the corporate world, or they do, but they're not the corporate security program.
Yeah.
And so the first big challenge really was, how do we build all this expertise, and what is our actual response advice for these issues, and how do we help people through? So that was a really big piece of work. And now I think we are leading in some areas, if not close to leading in some areas like cyber stalking, because we've done so much work to look along with cyber charities and academics to say, what is the response and how do we do this? The other big challenge is just funding. And so funding is extremely hard, because a lot of the big grants and funding are really focused on big charities. And so, there'll be pots of money out there that you can apply for, but you have to have a minimum income of £100,000 a year, for example. So they can trust you're big enough to manage the money and do the right things with it. So when you're kind of tackling a new area, really tricky because you don't have that type of money. We still don't have that type of money, and we're 4 years old. And so it's really, begging and borrowing, taking user donations. We have our first sponsor in Access Insurance, which has been great because that gives us some income. We have organizations like Sapio Information Security who will do fundraising for us and, run a Tough Mudder or a 5K and all that kind of thing. All those little pockets of money really help us survive. And then it's just, I'll finish on a final point here because I can go on. But then it's just, nobody else has really done this before.
Yeah.
So we have essentially set up a free instant response service for the general public for any type of cybercrime with a 24/7 chatbot and self-service model and a team of 80 or so volunteers on our help desk providing direct support for free to victims. And so it's not as if there is a model that we're following. Often in the board meeting or the team meetings, we're sitting there thinking, this is really hard. What should we do about this particular thing? And we're trying to work it out for ourselves. So in some ways that's good because we're taking on the problem. In other ways, I hope that we'll be able to pave a way for other organizations in other countries or in the UK to think about how they solve problems like these.
I think as a charity, because we've built it from the ground up, and with Rory and my experience, we've been able to leverage the cloud and things. So many charities in my business world, I'm looking after charities' infrastructure, for instance. They are spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on their infrastructure and their servers and their systems, whereas we have cut things down to the finite detail. So we are running at a bare minimum overhead, which is great. We're making sure everything is completely secure. That's all great. But it's still finding it hard to get the capital to keep us going. And yet these other companies, these other charities, again, I'm working with them to try and help them minimize their overheads because they've got offices, they've got huge daily expenses, whereas we are all volunteers. We haven't got an office. We're all in the cloud. We've got all of these things. So we're at a sort of bare minimum tick over. These other charities are spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on infrastructure, and it's almost disheartening in a way when we're trying to just get a little bit of funding to keep us going while helping other charities as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of that one of your goals is to pave the way for other charities in different countries. And my final question was going to be, what is the goal, you know, for the cyber helpline in the future? So is there other goals that you have as well as that?
Yeah, we are really focused on scaling right now. So we, you know, so let's say we are helping 700 victims a month in the UK. We think there are probably up to 1.5 million victims in the UK every year. So we're still helping a very small percentage of victims. Now, many more will come to our website and use some of our self-help stuff, but it's still small. And so for us, we're in this place of how can we grow quickly to help as many people as possible, but how can we grow slow enough that we don't just fall over? And so a big part of that is scaling. And I think those things that will help us do that are funding, starting talking about ourselves and raising our brand awareness so people know that we're here, and then making sure that we have the kind of maturity and the controls in place to understand when we're growing too quickly.
Yeah.
And I think as we grow, we want to help every victim in the UK who needs it, and we want to make sure they have that free immediate advice. But we also realize that that puts us in a place where we have real insight into what's happening to victims, you know, what is the cyber crimes they're experiencing, the issues they come across online, but B, what is the impact on those individuals. And so I think what will happen to us as we grow is we'll continue to help victims, but we'll also start to be the voice of those victims, trying to influence things like law enforcement, investment, regulation, and the support in other areas too, like, you know, helping domestic abuse charities and stalking charities with that technical side and understanding some of those issues. So a lot of it is scaling and growth, but a big part of it will be using the data and experience we've got to try and make things better.
Yeah.
I think it is a global situation and a global problem. We have been approached by a number of other countries around the world from different people to say, could you help us out? And we're more than happy to help anyone out, let's be honest, with regards to our knowledge and experience and what we've learned from building out the UK cyber helpline. But at the moment, we need to focus on the UK cyber helpline and making sure that, I mean, our strapline is a UK where the cyber criminals do not win. And we're still not seeing that, but we're getting there, and the thing, we need to carry on focusing on that before we start expanding into other countries. But all the other countries around the world are experiencing this very problem, and nobody seems to have been putting anything in place to help them.